This episode of Serverless Chats is sponsored by Lamigo. This week, Rebecca and I chat with charity majors about deploying on Fridays. This is Serverless Chats, episode number 118. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeremy Daly.
And I'm Rebecca Marshburn.
And you're listening to Serverless Chats. Hey, Rebecca.
Hey, I am so excited that I'm going to say no banter for us today. Tell us who we're listening to.
Yeah, I agree that we have an amazing guest today. So our guest is the CTO and co-founder at Honeycomb, co-author of Database Reliability Engineering and the upcoming Observability Engineering Achieving Production Excellence book. She's a regular speaker, a writer of some absolutely amazing articles. Charity Majors is with us today. Hey, Charity, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So we noticed we were talking just quickly before the show here, and we noticed you were doing some painting. So besides painting, what else have you been up to lately?
What else have I been up to? Gradually starting to get back to the world. I went out for drinks with Nora Jones Wednesday night, and then I was supposed to go out last night, but I realized that going out once on Wednesday blew my entire social budget for the rest of the week. It was too hard. I couldn't do it. I'm going to have to work my way back up slowly. So, whew. Introverts.
Right. Well, I'm getting on a plane to go to reInvent in a couple of weeks. And
holy shit.
I'm like, I haven't been on a plane since February of 2020, I think, when I came back from Nashville. So, and I think somebody else posted the other day, they're like, traveling for the first time since the beginning of the pandemic. Don't think I remember how to do any of this stuff. So I'm like, I don't know. It's gonna be an adjustment getting back into all the stuff. So, Well, anyways, we have a whole bunch of things that we would love to talk to you about today. And I wanted to start actually with an article that you wrote quite a while back, which was called "The Future of Ops Careers." And in that article, you actually called out the serverless musical that I did, the Lambda serverless musical.
I did, didn't I?
And you said that although you liked the song, that you thought that would be better, rather than saying reducing ops, that serverless reduces ops, that it really should be more about improving your ops. And I totally agree with you too. And I think we had a little bit of banter back and forth on Twitter about it. But
I also completely concede that the rhyme was better the way you did it. It was snappier.
I think that was my argument. My argument was it's there was a lot of rhymes going on in that, so it did work out well.
Yeah.
But I actually I think you bring up a good point, because I totally agree with you. And I and one of the things I never tried to do, or I certainly don't try to do, and I know some people do, is to equate this idea of serverless with no ops. I mean, I don't think in any world that serverless is going to allow you to do, to completely ignore ops. So I'm just curious from your standpoint, like, what is in that serverless world, I think you reduce certain types of ops, but you can also do other ops better. So, like, what's your take on that? Like, what do you think serverless enables ops teams to do better?
Well, fundamentally, operations is just the practice of delivering software to users, right? And of doing it well. So you can't, if you have users and you have code and you want to get one to the other, like you can't have no ops. What was your question again?
I'm just, in the serverless world, I mean, if you are reducing certain, and I think this goes back to maybe this idea of toil. And I think that it unfairly sometimes operations get sort of put into this bucket of toil.
For sure.
And
I think like the defenders of last resort at the castle, right? If the dragons have gotten through all the other teams and all the other soldiers, ops is the ones who are going to make sure that there's still a company tomorrow after the outage. The shit lands on us if it hasn't been fixed further upstream, indefinitely. Yeah, and I do think there's a real place for SRE teams or ops teams or whatever you want to call them in a serverless world, while also acknowledging that the lines are blurred and most ops people are now software engineers as well, right? Because it's all about automating, it's all about moving up the stack. But there are a couple of different models that I've seen companies be really successful with. One of them is using ops as like internal consultants, basically. They're expert in systems. You own your code, but ops, they know how to, get the alerting and the SLOs, and they know what good software systems smell like and look like, and they know how to make sure that you're integrating the security and, all this stuff, which is a very real like basket of expertise that most software engineers don't have and never will, because they're not being exposed to quite as many fires on the front end. But right. So like Fender is one of our customers who's heavy into serverless, and they have a great world-class SRE team, right? And the SRE team is focused on enabling and empowering the software engineers to own their code in production, and making it so that, the observability tooling uses reusable libraries, and, that there's a naming schema for, the fields that you're using, and making sure that, when reliability is going down, that you've got kind of a coach there to help you figure out how to get it back. So yeah, I think that, we're getting better. Like, we're such pessimists in this industry, but we're legitimately getting better at doing software. We're able to do less. We're able to do more with less at an accelerating rate. And more teams are leaning heavily into the things that, we've been talking about ever since Jez and then published the old CI/CD book. These technologies and these practices are finally coming of age, and the speed of processors and disks and everything just keeps getting cheaper, and so we're able to collect more and do more with it, blah blah blah. But things are getting better, and I think this speaks to a lot of the movement that SREs and ops have been going through in the last few years too.
So you're talking a little bit about this, almost what I would say, you said blurry lines, right? But maybe it's a permeable membrane between ops folks and I don't even want to say ops folks like it's two separate buckets, but let's say like ops people, as you said, are even turning into software engineers, and those things are.
I've always liked the term systems engineer.
Systems engineer. I do too.
And I feel like it's almost like we're the code pessimists. Yes, we can write code, and we will do so as a last resort after exhausting all other possibilities, which is a really good thing to have in your system, is people who approach it from that perspective instead of just like, more code, more code, more code. Ops people see more code and they're just like, So
if we think about that idea of systems engineer, I'm wondering if you have any advice for ops-minded people who maybe need to also help reconfigure their brain and also move up the stack and be a systems engineer, or perhaps less focused on what used to be like, here's the ops bucket and then here's the engineering bucket. Do you have any advice for them to be like, hey, you might be looking at the wrong skills now. Here's how to perhaps think about it in this world we're in.
Yeah, well, that's why I wrote that piece that Jeremy referred to up front, where I quoted his wonderful rap. Which, if you all haven't listened to it or watched it, you really owe it to yourself to look it up. It's fantastic. But yeah, I think that there's kind of a divergence. There's a kind of a fork in the road that's coming up for ops people, and this has been a long time coming. I remember when I got started, when I was 17 and in college, I was the sysadmin for the mass stat department. This involved everything from going down to the colo every time the database went down to flip a switch, or like to manually jiggle the RAM. There were no remote switches or anything like that. Like, you were responsible for everything. If you were doing databases, you had to figure out, the RPMs of the disks and how to position the indexes at the right, you were doing everything. And I, for one, never want to have to go to a colo again. I'm delighted that AWS does that part of my ops for me. They're better at it than I am, and that's all great, right? So, as systems engineers are moving up the stack too. It used to be that any technology company had to employ just an army of folks to do everything from, hell, I used to be like the mail admin. I was so good at postfix and ClamAV and antivirus software and all this shit. IMAP, I'd run IMAP and debug it for the CEO, like we had to run mail, we had to run DNS, we had to run, just like everything. And, that was really costly and it was really expensive and it was a lot of territory to cover. Now, like the reason that we're able to move so fast and have so much, innovation and so much, speed and like startups that are like spinning up every day is because, so much of that has become commodity and so much of it we don't have to deal with anymore. So, instead of being like this full stack systems engineer, to coin a phrase, I think that, the only companies that really need that sort of experience are the closed systems, the Facebooks, the Googles, et cetera. And so if you're in infrastructure, you've really kind of got two choices. If you love your infrastructure, like you want to eat, sleep, and if you love being a mail admin, you don't want to give it up. You have to go work for a company that does that as a service, right? You have to go work for an infrastructure company so that you're not a cost center that just is trying to be minimized, right? You need to go where the stuff that you do is best in class for the entire world, providing it as a service, whether that's like, I used to run mailing list software. Now we've got all of these companies that do it for us, right? So you got to go somewhere where what you want to do is the specialty. It is what you are doing. Or you can go the direction of being like sort of a high level somebody who understands systems well enough, but your job is not to build software, it's to empower software engineers. You're almost more like an in-house coach. You're the one with all of the like industry experience about how to do SLOs and when is the right time to, is your backup strategy like sane and redundant to the right numbers of, reliability. You need to be able, and your role is almost more of one of it being an educator than anything. And a lot of times, it's about helping your company figure out when to lean into trends and invest them and when it's a waste of time, right? Your job is to make sure that every fresh young engineer that comes in the door gets indoctrinated in the ways of the system and the on-call and the pager and learns how to, pull their weight. But it's, and sometimes you may jump in and you may be the release engineer. You may be, CI/CD, all that socio-technical stuff that goes into, running systems. But it will be constantly changing. It will be it's never going to be a large cohort of people, right? It'll be like a ratio of maybe 1 or 2 SREs to every, one SRE to every 10 or 20 software engineers, right? And it's a very senior role, I think. It's really hard for me to see where the new junior systems people are really going to come from, which is a whole different topic. I'll stop now for breath.
Well, I was going to say, if you haven't administered or ran your own mail server, then you just haven't lived. Those are the days I remember that as well. I remember the first.
I miss grepping my mail spool, don't you?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Or the first time I got a remote KVM for my co-location facility, it was magic. I could control machines remotely. Oh, it was so. So I think you make a really interesting point though about, there was this class of engineer or operations person that was like a systems engineer, was like managing those actual systems. And then we moved to a point where even the configuration of some of these systems, even some of the failover, the tolerance, some of these things are being built by the developers who are, coding these things with infrastructure as code and handling some of that. But I mean, if we go back to the sort of toil thing, I always looked at my maintenance of my infrastructure when I actually had to go to a co-location facility at 2 a.m. to swap a drive. That was just things that were like, it provided value in that I kept the system up and running, but it really added no value to the work that I did. I didn't feel valuable going and swapping a drive.
There was a lot of wasted time and effort there.
A lot of wasted time and effort. So now you move to where you've got these massive data centers and the cloud's running them for you. You've got managed services, and you move to this next level. And you said something like a CI/CD engineer or something like that. I mean, if I'm a developer and I'm trying to move fast, I can learn Lambda and I can learn Fargate and I can learn Kubernetes maybe in terms of how I might do some configuration there. Maybe I learn, DynamoDB or some other specialty services. But do I want to go deep on IAM? Do I want to go deep on the CI/CD release process? Do I want to go deep on making sure all my KMS keys are rotated on a regular basis? So I do think that there is a lot of work that can be done that's still, I hate to call it toil, but the things that are specialty that someone needs to learn that still
it's
your developer doesn't want to do.
Is how I think of it. It's platform engineering. And
right.
I don't like to think of it in terms of what the developers want to do or not, because they can be prissy little fucks sometimes.
Put the explicit thing on this episode. That's fine.
Sorry. But like, they're not wrong sometimes when it's like, this is a thing that, we don't want every developer to go off and solve it in a different way, right?
Yes.
We want there to be a golden path. We want it to be well researched. We want it to be, flexible, but not, but not wiggly, right? We want to make sure that there's standardization. We want to make sure that the choices are well understood. We want to, and if it's something that is, being built for the platform, then, you'll get into this situation where like people are like it's like musical chairs. Like the first one to hit it has to like take a detour for 2 or 3 weeks to like build this, authentication thing or something. And that's just like, it's a cost that's being, borne unfairly by some developer. And, now there is still definitely a role for building platform stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a pretty software engineering-y role, but it's kind of a hybrid systems and software, and it does assume a lot of good judgment, So yeah, but I do think that the platform engineering teams are kind of, I think, slowly taking over a lot of the territory that used to be SRE ops and absorbing a lot of those people. We actually at Honeycomb, we don't have any ops team. We have a platform engineering team, which has one self-described SRE on it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're getting pretty large. So, but the only reason that we've been able to do that, of course, is because we had ops expertise from day one. So we never got into that hole that most companies get into where they're like, oh, fuck, we have a bunch of code and now we have some users. Shit. And then somebody has to come in and like undo everything they've done and do it correctly and all that stuff.
Right.
Charity, what I love about your answers is that there's a lot of philosophy baked into them, whether or not we couch it as like philosophically, let's talk about, systems engineering, or let's talk about where ops is going. There's another philosophy or philosophical, I think, umbrella that you hold really dear, which is philosophies around deploying on Fridays. I know that's one of your favorite topics. And if anyone is interested in reading more of your thoughts on the matter, we will both recommend, Jeremy and I, that you just Google Charity Majors Friday Deploy. And that's it. It'll be a good surprise for you. But Charity, I'd love maybe if you could start with your general thoughts on Friday deploys. I'd love to set the baseline for the Charity Majors philosophy on this.
Sure. And this is some place where I think people like to paint me as a radical and just like a fire breather or something. I'm not. I am from ops. I am a pragmatist at heart. I am not trying to draw a line in the sand and be like, if you don't do this, you are terrible, My point is just that, if you are unable to deploy for a solid 20% of your week, that's not great. That's not something to aspire to. It's not, and some people will be like, well, this is a sign of how much I value my people and their weekends and everything. And I'm like, no, it's not. If you really valued their time that much, you wouldn't want them to only be protected from this on Fridays. People get paged overnight all week long. If you really care about your people, you will fix this problem so that deploys are safe, reliable, so easy to flip back and revert, easy for engineers to deploy their own shit. It should be a nothing burger, right? It should be like, it's like the heartbeat of your system. And heartbeat should be regular, predictable, trivial, like nothing, right? Small diffs, one engineer at a time. They should go out just like constantly all day long. And if you've done these things, it will make absolutely no sense to you to block off Fridays, right? And, there are some places where, some people have extreme situations. Some people, blah, blah, blah. I don't know everyone's specific situations. And there are some situations that, I'm like, okay, that's valid. But for the most part, I hear a lot of excuses.
Right.
For the most part, I hear a lot of shit that makes me see that they just haven't done the work, right? If it takes them an hour or two to get their code out, I'm pretty sure they're batching together a whole bunch of engineers to code at once, which is like, there are like 5 things wrong with this. If it takes you that long to get shit out, like the amount of time it takes you to get a single line of code out into production is extremely telling. Like, can you do that in 15 minutes or less? If so, like, you can probably ship on Fridays, like no problems, right? If you're doing auto deploys, if you're, it's just, it all kind of goes together. And I just don't like seeing it used as an excuse to not improve. If you can't get there, I get that. Sometimes people are dealing with a lot of legacy shit, or they've got external, customers and requirements. I'm just saying you can probably get a lot closer than you are now, and it will be nothing but benefit to your people. Like every step that you can get towards being able to auto deploy regularly will help people, will save time, will make your engineers' lives more joyful. Like it's win, 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 win. And so I don't understand why people continue to just radically underinvest in this area.
Right, and that's one of the things that, again, if people go and read a lot of what you write, you take the stance of there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to deploy on Friday. It shouldn't be a hard and fast rule. And a lot of, I think, what you talk about, and I think a lot of what we see is the idea that people just find deployments to be very risky, which is really scary when you think about it, that people are like, hey, if I deploy this, I could bring the whole system down. And you mentioned this idea of like, single or small deployments, single individual developer deployments. And you talk about all this stuff. And again, I suggest people go and read your blogs and the things that you've written, because there's a lot of...
We have this like instinct as humans. Like it's like an instinct that is just ingrained in us. When things are scary, we freeze, right? Yeah. When we're scared, if we're walking in the woods and we don't know what we're going to step on, we slow the fuck down, right? The problem is with software, speed is safety, right? And this is just something that we have to like, get our heads around, that speed is safety. The more quickly you can do it, the smaller the diffs you can do it. That's how you if you freeze up and you try to enact more control and more barriers and more gates and more processes, you're only hurting yourself like a lot.
Right. And that's what you talk about when you're saying small diffs. If people aren't sure what you mean by that, you're talking about doing small deployments, like, or merging code, single feature, or even smaller than that, I guess, merging that code as quickly as possible, getting that into production. And then you have another thing that you talk about, observability driven development, where you're building in to, basically build in the tools you need to that code so that you can observe it and that if it works. And if you can do that quickly and you can put that code into production, if something breaks, right after you wrote that code is the best time for you to go back and fix it. Not for you to wait like a month later and then be like, I don't even remember writing this code, let alone how it's supposed to work. So maybe dive into that. Why are these single merge deploys so important?
Well, it's more about, it's about having one engineer's changes at a time go out. In large part, because if you know that your code is going to be live in 10 minutes, you're very likely to go look at it. If you're pretty sure that your code and up to a dozen other people's code is going to go live at some point the next day, you're absolutely never going to go look at it. Right. And that point,
and you're going to blame it on somebody else, probably. Like, it's probably their fault.
Sometimes and then like all of those dozen people have to interrupt their day to try and figure out whose diff broke the thing, and it's just like everybody, it's just a whole mess. But like, if you can get that feedback loop down, if you can write instrumentation as you're writing your code, with an eye to your future self, like, how am I going to understand this? And then you merge it. And if it auto deploys, I love auto deploy. This is the best thing I think we did at the beginning of Honeycomb, and it was unwittingly, it was just we were lazy, so we made our CI/CD pipeline automatically deploy to production every 10 minutes, and just having that loop meant that we grew up with it, right? It was never scary. It was never hard because it was just what we did from the beginning. And so you just knew you could merge it and you could look at it. It becomes muscle memory, right? And it becomes, you get that dopamine hit, and you don't feel like you're done until you've gotten the dopamine hit of like going and looking for it. And like that moment when you have just deployed it, like you have all the context in your head. You know exactly why you did it. You know what you tried, what trade-offs there were, what you didn't do, what the point of it was, you know, what the variables are named, what the functions are named, you know, what failure will look like. And if you go look at it, like you will never again be as primed and ready to understand the code and see what's working or not, like ever. And nobody can ever come in your tracks and reconstruct what was in your head. Like that moment, it's only going to decay from there. And it's precious, and you should get it in. You should look at it as quickly as possible. Another thing that I like to talk about with the deploys is like just the idea of judgment, having good engineering judgment. I think one of the only ways that you really develop good senior engineering level judgment is by immersing yourself in production, not just looking at it when it's broken, also looking at it when it's good, right? Because that's how you know what normal looks like. Right? You ship your change and you go look at it. 9 times out of 10 or more, it'll be fine. But that trains you over time. This is what normal looks like. This is what weird looks like, right? And when I say don't deploy on Fridays, what I actually am saying is don't merge your code if you don't have the time to stick around and make sure it's okay, right? Because you should assume that once you've merged your code, it's going to go out. That's an atomic operation as far as you're concerned, right? You merge, it goes. So if it's 5 p.m. on a Tuesday and you're heading for the door, don't merge your fucking code.
Right.
You know, if it's on Friday and you're feeling icky about it, like it's a big change or whatever, first of all, feature flags are your friend here.
I was just going to say that, right.
But like, don't ship it, you know, don't merge. Like, I'm not saying remove the human element of deliberation. I am saying absolutely build that sense within yourself. But just make it about whether or not you're going to merge instead of whether you're going to deploy. Because once you've severed that connective, that tight feedback loop between when you've written it and when you're looking at it, it's just all downhill from there.
And I was going to bring up the point on feature flags because that's one of the things too where I think some people get confused when you're like, well, if I'm writing some big new feature, I want to wait till that feature's done before I merge that into the code base.
Right.
And I always look at it and I say, well, no, break the feature down to say, I have to deploy some new resource. Well, deploy the new resource and guess what? None of your code touches it, but make sure that the resource deployed, make sure it's there, have any tests you need against it, and then do another release where you add the ability to connect to that resource or whatever it is. And you can do that incrementally. And again, you can turn the whole thing off, right? So your code never gets run for 99.9% of your users, except for maybe you or a couple others that you can turn that feature flag on.
Code is like an iceberg. There's so much more underneath it than there is on the surface area. There's still a lot of value in getting it out into production, even if you're not quote unquote using it. It's still being used. It still has the potential to break or deploy cleanly, right? Small diffs still matter, even if you're like, well, but it's not. And really the thing about feature flags that's so brilliant is that it decouples deploys from releases. It makes the releases can be something that the product people think about or the marketing people think about. And deploys can be something that engineers think about. And you don't have to like have all this, you know, waiting on each other and like timing and big bang deploys. And, you know, the worst deploy in the world is always the one after people come back from Christmas break. That's the worst outages of my life have 100,000% been in January, the first 2 weeks of January.
that's the thing too. Like, I love that idea of saying you've got, deployments are what engineers think about, releases are what marketing thinks about, and maybe the best thing that you could do to relieve the stress is give your marketing team like a big button they could press to flip the feature flag for you, and then the engineers don't have to do anything. It's just you just enabled it. It's been running for weeks and it's been working fine. So you want to release it to everybody, hit that button, and then you're good to go. And you can be out having beers on a Friday afternoon or whatever it is you want.
And it will allow you to, first release it to maybe internal users only, right? Or only the marketing team, or only your beta users, or right? Like, you should never think of deploys as an on-off switch. You should think of it as a process, sometimes quite lengthy process, of increasing your confidence in new code, right? Progressive deployments are your friends. Canaries are your friends, right? Having all these little like wiggly things around deploys, like it's a process. It's like it's baking in the oven. Like, you can't trust it until it's been through its paces.
Yeah, I like how your phrase was speed is safety. And I think what you're saying, right, is do the work to eliminate the things that feel scary, or not even that feel scary, that could be scary. Like, do the work so that those things are not scary. And the way to do that is through speed. And I think you were going to say something. So before I quote you, do you want to follow up?
Go for it.
Okay, so one of the quotes that I love from you is you say, anxiety related to deploys is the single largest source of technical debt in many, many organizations. Technical debt, lest we forget, is not the same as air quote or quotes bad code. Tech debt hurts your people. And so I think there's something here between, bad code, and let's talk about that, versus like code smell. And there's maybe some sort of like some charity philosophy here that I'd want to dig into a little bit more.
I just think that the anxiety that people have around deployments, I get it. Like, I've been in ops, and this is not about making everyone a masochist like we have been traditionally. It's about that this is really the way that it gets better, right? And resiliency, reliability is not about making your systems never fail. It's about making it resilient to lots of failures.
Hi, everyone. I want to take a minute to thank our sponsor, Lumigo. We've talked a lot about observability on this podcast, and if you've listened to any of those episodes, then you know that it can be difficult to achieve serverless observability with traditional approaches. Though serverless comes with many opportunities and advantages, it also has some unique issues that some tools just aren't able to address, and those issues really need something meant for serverless environments. That's where Lumigo comes in. As a serverless-first monitoring platform, Lumigo lets developers quickly and easily find and fix errors and performance issues while also giving you an end-to-end view of the entire transaction across services and functions. All of the debugging information you need is conveniently in one place, and you're able to set up alerts so that you know what's happening and how it might affect the user experience. Lumigo also knows how to play nice with your existing toolchain, enabling you to send alerts to email, Slack, Microsoft Teams, Opsgenie, and more, and can also create tickets in Jira straight from the issues page. Thanks to their automatic distributed tracing, it only takes 4 clicks to set up Lumigo with no manual code changes necessary. Sign up for free at lumigo.io. So one of the things that you've also talked about in the past is just, the idea of fast feedback loops, being able to invest time in ops. And I'm kind of curious because this is, I saw a tweet, I think it was from Liz Fong Jones, it was just yesterday, where it was, she retweeted something about another ops team who said the number of these what do they call them? I guess developer influencers who talk about how CI/CD is supposed to be done and how all this is, that those aren't even practiced in the organizations that they're working in, right? Because it's hard. There's so much legacy stuff. There's so many things that make it super hard to do. And I'm just curious, when it comes to driving these types of changes, do the developers have to do it? Is it the existing ops people, whatever we want to, however we want to classify them? Is it management? Like, where does this change come from? Where does that confidence, how do you build that confidence within your organization? Who has to drive it?
Well, I'll take anyone I can get. But ideally, I think that this is a responsibility of engineering managers. I think that, It's their job to translate between engineering needs and business needs. It's their job to make the case upward for why, we need to miss these feature release dates in order to deal with this tech debt. It's their job to make the case that, it's worth investing on people do not do nearly enough work in internal tools. There was this great essay by Coda Hale about work and how you scale, teams' productivity. And like, best case, if you're just like hiring people, you can achieve linear productivity growth. Nobody actually achieves that. The only way that you can actually like achieve, the kind of productivity growth that you need in order to keep doing more work with fewer people, is by investing in those internal tooling systems, by doing migrations, by keeping up your tool chain. Like so many developer resources are just wasted these days. Have you ever like looked at a company and like, oh, cool app, and you figure out they have like 1,500 developers, and you're like,
right, what are they doing?
Fuck are they all doing? I guarantee you they have a nightmare of a release process, because it magnifies it, just like it takes over from there. Like it all starts at that one little interval between when you write it and when it's live. If you don't get that right, it's you get into this death spiral where it takes longer because you've got bigger diffs and you're deploying more people's code at once, and it takes longer to figure it out and recover. I've got a number that I've pulled out of my ass, but I'm pretty sure it's true, which is that if it takes X number of engineers to build, support your system with 15-minute time to life, well, if it takes like an hour or two, it takes twice as many engineers. If it takes like almost a day, at least it takes twice as many engineers again. If it takes a week, it takes twice as many engineers again. And if anything, I'm being conservative, because Facebook showed that the amount of time that elapses between when you write the bug and when you find it, the cost of finding and fixing that bug goes up exponentially. And so like engineering managers need to be making this fucking argument. They're all asking for headcount when in fact, you want to double your engineering cycles, fix your fucking build pipeline.
Right.
Like engineering managers are too, they're too, like, I don't know what the word is. Like they're trying to fit in with all the business managers or something, or they're not confident enough. This is a winning argument. This is an argument that will make your teams ecstatic. This is an argument that will get you promoted. This is an argument that works. Like I've never heard of anyone who like invested time in like making their deploys better and stuff and was afterwards like, oh man, we shouldn't have done that. It
Right.
fucking works, right? We need to be more aggressive about this, because somebody's got to start it. And I don't care. Sometimes it's a CTO, sometimes it's the VP of engineering, sometimes it's a director or a manager, senior engineer. If that's you, like, even if you're a junior engineer, like, start looking for ways to improve it. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit. I guarantee you. Making your build pipeline, 15 minutes or less, it's just engineering. Instrument it as a trace. Like use Honeycomb, free tier, build events, instrument it as a trace, see where the time's going, fix it. Like every question that you have about that build pipeline, where the time's going, is a great question to have. Do you still need that 15-minute thing that like build packs and like ships artifacts? Do you still need, can you parallelize this? Is this still relevant? Like these are questions. And it just accumulates so much fucking craft, and nobody's like having the discipline to keep that number down. I think that, if I was a VP of a random engineering team, I would set an SLO for this is code has to go out in 15 minutes or less, right? And, engineering managers, your reviews will factor in how successful you are at the 4 DORA metrics, how often your teams get paged after hours, and how well you're able to stick to this time, right? And if they're like, no, legacy and like corporate and lawyers and everything, at least start this for new services. At least auto deploy new shit that you bring up, so you aren't just adding to the pile.
Right, and Accelerate. I mean, the book Accelerate does point the correlation between developer happiness and how fast their code gets into production.
Absolutely. This is, developers leave because of frustration with their tools. Nobody ever got burned out for shipping too much code. Developers get burned out from doing all the shit that's preventing them from shipping code, right? And I'm not someone who is a fan of overworking people. I believe as an engineer, you've got about 3, maybe 4 hours a day of real focused, hard engineering work in you. And if you can get that in, moving the company forward 3 or 4 hours a day meaningfully is phenomenal. It is remarkable. That is rapid progress. The problem is people are working 15-hour days and getting maybe 20 or 30 minutes of actually moving the business forward out of all that.
Yeah, so you've always been a big proponent of providing environments that like respect and encourage like this balance between work and life and actually having productive time, even if it's a shorter window of time, but like actually use that time for being productive. I'm wondering if you have any advice for folks like who maybe think that they're doing that. How might they be able to smell out if they're not actually doing that? Is it simply a measure of, okay, how much time do my engineers actually have to work and what are they getting done in that? Or like, what can they ask themselves to like actually reflect on whether or not they're...
Just ask yourself, am I moving the business forward? Like toil is not moving the business forward, right? Toil is clearing the road so that you can try and move the business forward. If, I want to empower engineers to be able to spend most of their time on feature work, right? It just has to be done correctly. And that means investments. That means, not leaving your technical debt till it threatens to swallow you, right? If you're moving the company forward, it's a happiness index as much as anything, right? It makes people happy when they're able to move things forward. I think you could probably just like take the temperature of every engineering team. I've done this before in the past. Just ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, what percentage of your time do you think you spend moving the business materially forward? 50%, 60%? People get pretty fucking close. Like they know how much of their time is worth spending on what they're doing.
Especially when when you have a bunch of developers stuck in meetings all day, that's super productive.
Yeah.
But so we're starting to run out of time, and I just want to quickly ask a question that we had from one of our listeners who knew you were going to be on the show, and they just wanted to know if you've seen a significant difference in sort of DevOps practices between people who are building serverless infrastructures versus other infrastructures, or is there a way to sort of see that breakdown, or is it pretty much the same?
Oh, that's very interesting. The lack of real durability of the data is certainly an interesting thing with serverless, and the fact that I don't know what state of the art is now. Certainly when I was really looking at it, there wasn't really much of an idea of staging environments, which I kind of dig. Right. I'm a fan of testing in production, as you might know. I think that it forces you to treat your code as something that you're in conversation with it in production every day, right? You have to go check it in production. I think that the way that serverless approaches instrumentation is kind of the way I see the entire industry should be approaching it, which is like approach it as though, you're asking your code itself to understand, from its perspective, like, where's my time going, et cetera, and not paying so much attention to like, hardware metrics or like, the shit under /proc or, all of these meaningless dashboards that, you really shouldn't have to look at as a software engineer. But like just having a habit of, capturing every HTTP call and every database query and the time elapsed and the raw query and the normalized query and just like gathering all this stuff, aggregating it around the request and shipping it off, as an arbitrarily wide structured data blob. So I think there are differences there. But I don't really feel like I'm completely up on serverless stuff enough to really comment.
So in January 2022, And as you said, January is one of your favorite times to come back and have a release because it's always the best right after Christmas. But something really exciting is really happening in January 2022. And that is your new book, Observability Engineering, Achieving Production Excellence, is coming out. You co-authored it with Liz Fong-Jones and George Miranda. Super exciting. Love to be able to say their names on the show as well. And for those with an O'Reilly account, you can actually go and read the early release version. But Charity, will you tell us a little bit about who this book is for and what people should expect to get out of it come January 2022?
Yeah. We've tried to make it very approachable and friendly, written in English, but it's just for people who, whether you're new to observability or whether you're fairly experienced in the field, we try to make it very practical. Where do you start? What is it? How is it different? Separate some of the marketing hype from the reality. Like what trends, both technical and architectural, are driving it? Who needs it? Who doesn't need it? Should you buy or should you build? How do you instrument? How do you do traces? How do you, what's some of the, philosophy behind it? And also some of the, we've got a guest chapter from Frank Chen at Slack on CI/CD plus observability. We've got, chapters on what tools you need to use in order to achieve high cardinality and high dimensionality. And we've got, robust explanations for why it's not observability if you don't have those things. But, it's less philosophy and that sort of definition boring and just more, to the point that some places it's a little bit of a grab bag of stuff. It's just like, this was useful, put it in there. This was useful, put it in there. It's not really a chapter, but put it in there.
I wouldn't mind having a book that's just titled, "This is Useful."
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, I've read a couple of chapters because I do have an O'Reilly account, which is super useful, by the way. Getting to read some of these books as they're being written is really helpful. But practical advice. Ops-minded people, I think this is definitely the book for them to pick up and look at. So,
and for software engineers, who take the responsibility seriously. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Totally agree. So we are out of time. Charity, thank you so much for being here and sharing all this with us. If people want to find out more about you and Honeycomb and all that kind of stuff, what's the best way to do that?
My personal site is charity.wtf, and I'm on Twitter at Nipsey Tipsy. There's also the honeycomb.io/blog.
Awesome. Well, we will get all that in the show notes. Thanks again, Charity.
Sweet. Thank you.
And that's this week's Serverless Chat. Rebecca and I want to give a huge thank you to Charity Majors for being our guest this week, and to our sponsor, Lumigo. If you want to check out the show notes and a full transcript of this episode, you can find them at serverlesschats.com/118. For more Serverless Chats, subscribe, sign up to be an insider, check us out on YouTube, and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can connect with Rebecca on Twitter at Becca Odelay and me at Jeremy_Daily. And if you want to keep up to date on everything serverless, make sure you subscribe to the Off by None newsletter at offbynone.io. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to chatting with all of you again next week.